Submerged Hidden Depths. Is this another free epic game that deserves to be sunk to the bottom of the ocean, or a treasure chest waiting to be opened?
The Dutchman's treasure!
Wow!
Is this a worthy sequel to the original 2015 game, or should the devs have quit whilst they were ahead? Is this a masterpiece rising from the depths, or a nasty floater that just won't go down?
Harry, are you in there?
Be right out!
I hope you're not using the toilet, it's broken.
Huh?
Stick around if you're interested in finding out in depth if this game is worth your time and money. My name's Dan and welcome to D&DGaming. Joining me in the review as always is my brother Dav. So Dav, what were your expectations before playing this one?
So I'd not heard of this game before playing and definitely didn't have any preconceptions of the gameplay. Obviously I knew from the title it was water-based, but was fairly surprised on the style of gameplay once I began playing. It wasn't quite what I was expecting from the title.
This was a new one to me, and as with a lot of these free epic games that I've not heard of, I'm never quite sure what to expect. Luckily this really wasn't that bad. It's not without its issues, but I can't complain too much as it was free.
So in terms of graphic options, there's a fairly good range of graphic settings to tweak, but I'll get onto the performance of these graphic settings on my PC in a moment.
Yeah, there's a decent range of graphic options in this one, and more than I expected actually, but as Dav's alluded to, there's definitely some issues with the graphics themselves.
So in terms of graphics and graphics performance, we'll put our PC specs up on screen as usual, but the game ran pretty poorly on my PC. I began by setting up on the ultra setting, as I know my PC is easily capable of running the game on the highest setting, but almost immediately I ran into quite frequent frame drops and some major stuttering. I then lowered the graphic setting to high, and this lessened the frame drops and stuttering, but only a little, and they still continued, just less frequently. The graphics themselves are okay, I guess, quite cartoony, but they do fit the style of the game quite well. They're also quite vibrant and bright. Although I wasn't a huge fan of the graphics, to give credit where credit's due, the environment was really well done. It had that nature reclaimed vibe to it, which looked really good. It was a really convincing, partly submerged city. As you float around the buildings, pieces fall off and crumble into the water, and this combined with the sounds, which we'll come on to later, really added together to create a very atmospheric experience.
So like Dav, mine defaulted to the high and ultra settings, but I quickly noticed a fair bit of stuttering. I don't mind tweaking graphics a little to find a good middle ground, but here I tried quite a few different things, from lowering the settings themselves to switching between full screen and windowed, but still had definite issues with the stuttering. It was most noticeable when turning the camera, I found, and at times it would freeze just slightly before kind of jumping forward. It really was quite frustrating. I thought it might have been my CPU messing about at first, which is a definite bottleneck in my system, but as Dav had the same issues, I think this is definitely a problem with the game. I also looked at some mainstream reviews and this issue came up numerous times. I suspect it could be that it hasn't been optimised very well for the PC version and they likely concentrated more on the console versions.
So in terms of player controls, the controls are quite basic. On keyboard it's simply WASD to move around as the player and controlling the boat, shift key to walk slower, E key to interact with the few things you can interact with, T key to use the telescope, and spacebar to use the boost when in the boat, along with a few other keys. I did find on keyboard the controls to be very driven and forced when controlling the player. There didn't seem to be much freedom in them, and they did feel as though they were more controller focused and a bit on rails. Having said that, the boat controls really nicely, turns on the spot and has better placement of control when turning than on foot, and you can get the back end of the boat out, which is quite fun. One frustrating thing is that you can't jump in the game. This is quite a frequent thing in some indie story-driven games and not unusual, but it becomes an issue when you get stuck in the environment, which happened multiple times to me whilst playing the game. There are also a number of other issues I had with the controls, but I'll come on to those later in my dislikes. You can rebind your keys in the controls menu, which is helpful, and it does have controller support.
There are fairly standard platformer type controls in this, but a big difference is that there's no jump button, as Dav mentioned, and so you don't have as much freedom as you initially expect. I do think this holds the game back a bit and definitely makes it feel more on rails. Despite this, I also thought the boat controlled very well and I had a lot of fun with it, boosting around and jumping over waves. It felt very smooth to control. It does seem the game was very focused on being optimised for controllers, and you can feel that in the movement of the characters.
So in terms of game mode, there's just one main story mode. The game starts with a short cutscene where a sister called Miku and her brother Taku are on a boat floating into a partly submerged city area that has some kind of black tentacles growing and climbing up all the buildings. They arrive at the centre of the area to a partly collapsed building that becomes their home. We won't go much more into the story, and we're keeping this part of the review fairly vague as we don't want to spoil it for any of you out there thinking of playing this game. There are main areas to explore which are the story-driven parts, and there are also areas that are more side mission type parts that just contain collectibles. For the main story areas, the aim is to find an orb type object that appears to have some kind of power. The power enables things to grow and flower in its vicinity and turns the black tentacles into more root-like plant structures.
In terms of the game mechanic, you can move around on foot on the partially collapsed buildings left over from before the flood, climbing up ladders and using rope and pulley systems, bridges and platforms. You can also whiz around in a boat to get to different areas, as well as putting down platforms to enable access to areas by foot, and moving floating platforms to enable routes to explore. Collectibles in the game include boat upgrades, sunken finds, books that explain the history, and player apparel changes. There are also flowers to collect, for some reason. You can display some of the collectibles at your base area, including the sunken finds and the flowers. You can use the telescope to look around the area for collectibles or areas of interest, and these get added to your map and compass.
So in terms of UI, the UI is fairly basic, but okay, I guess. There are a few icons that appear in the bottom left and right of the screen that are linked to functions such as the map and the telescope whilst as a player, and whilst controlling the boat, and these change for each, but other than that, it's very basic on the UI front. There's a compass with map icons on the top of the screen, and that's about it. As you can't die in the game and there's no combat, there's no health bar, as you don't have special moves or anything like that, so there's no energy, power or similar bars. One thing I did like that was related to the UI was a pop-up that alerted you to the fact that you'd collected all the discoverables in the particular vicinity. This helps so you didn't waste time like a silly twat wandering around thinking that there might be more collectibles to find in any particular area when actually you got everything.
Yeah, I thought the UI was fine for the most part, and I didn't have any issues with it. It was unobtrusive and showed everything I needed to see, and the menus had further info such as the diary entries and which collectibles you have. So in terms of sound and music, well, there's very minimal voice acting in this, and they don't speak English, so you don't really know what they're saying to each other.
Yes.
This was clearly intentional though, and isn't really an issue as the story is told on screen and through the diary entries you find. I thought the environmental sounds were all good, such as the boat splashing through the water and the various animal sounds. I thought the music was also very nice actually, and suited the story and environment well.
Yeah, so for me, the music in the game is very good. It's all written by the same composer, Jeff Van Dyke, and performed by an orchestra. It's very atmospheric and fits the game very well. My only gripe with the music is that the default music level seems very high, so it seems to overpower and drown out a lot of the game sounds, although this can be changed in the sound settings. The game sounds, as Dale pointed out, are also very good. There's lots of creaks and noises such as crumbling rocks as you scale the environments. These combined with the music and the environment do come together well to create an authentic feeling atmosphere. There's not really any voice dialogue as Dale's pointed out, and it tends to be single words or a few sentences at most from the two characters.
Som tænker pen, it maksate black plant.
So in terms of bugs and glitches, as mentioned earlier, there's quite a few frame drops and stutters for me graphically, and I did get stuck in the environment a fair few times. Once of which I had to restart the section. The game feels like it really should have been better optimized and tested better to iron out some of these issues.
Like Dav, I got stuck on objects more than once. And again, couldn't get out without restarting the area on one occasion. This really was quite frustrating at times, and I think whoever on the dev team was assigned to the pathfinding was slacking on the job. So to sum up, things I liked about the game, I actually quite like the cartoony graphics style, and the whole environment had a bright and vibrant feel and just had a nice look to it. The majority of the game world is covered in water, and I thought the water effects looked particularly nice and the waves looked realistic. The music is good and fits the theme of the game well. The boat is fun to mess about in and controls well. It was nice to upgrade it so you have more boosts for the longer distances as you go through the story. I thought it was an interesting premise, the idea that the world is flooded due to people ignoring warnings such as climate change and human impact on the environment. There was a slight underlying commentary in the diary entries about material goods and the greed of people. The idea that people strive for material goods, but what becomes of you when all that's taken away? The weather system is implemented well with heavy rain, thunder, but then nice sunsets as well, all very atmospheric.
So in terms of things I liked about the game, as Dale's pointed out, there's a great atmosphere to the game. The day and night cycle really changes the environment well, and this works well with the partly submerged sunken city setting. The story is pretty gripping, it builds up as you play on, and there's a feeling that you're slowly uncovering a mystery. No spoilers though. I thought looking around with the telescope and finding items in distance and this adding them to the map was quite a nice touch to the game mechanics. Whizzing around in the boat was quite fun, especially drifting around corners between partly sunken buildings and alleyways. Music and sound effects were used to great effect, and these really helped to create the atmosphere and drive the immersive story as the game went on.
So in terms of things I didn't like, I noticed the movement of the camera using the mouse seemed slightly off at first to me. Again, probably a hangover from them concentrating more on the console controls. It was only slightly noticeable, and I guess this depends on your own view on it, but yeah, it definitely felt like it was more optimized for controllers. I did find the numerous frame drops and stuttering really to be quite off-putting. Would have been nice to have a FOV slider, as I would have liked ideally the camera a little further back from the character. Gameplay is quite limited and there's little to no replayability. Once you finish the main story, you can finish getting any collectibles that are scattered about, but there's nothing else to really do, and so I don't think I'd play through it again. Character getting stuck in objects was really annoying, and although only temporary and not entirely game breaking, it feels something that could be resolved easy enough if they wanted to. The platforming element can be fun at times, but it's far too simplified. As there's no jump button, it basically holds your hand the whole time.
So for me, things I didn't like about the game holds your hand far too much, and this made it feel like it was aimed too much at kids that would otherwise get bored with limited attention span and put the game down if they were to actually explore the game. When did it change so that developers feel like they have to hold gamers' hands like we're all toddlers? It dumbs down games and makes them feel far too driven and linear, and unfortunately this is a perfect example of that. The game would be far better with less forced gameplay. It's a real shame you can't switch off the guide, as this really does massively dumb the game down and reduces the exploration part of the game because you can see exactly the way you need to go all of the time. I switched the guide colour to white to try and hide it better so that I could actually use my brain to work out where to go. Would have been far better if they simply had an off button in the settings. Would that be so hard? Come on developers, please stop treating gamers like kids with 2-second attention spans. Wait, what was I saying? The game has far too much repetition in its main mission gameplay. It needed more depth in some of these areas to avoid that deja vu feeling when you get into each area. Even with the different sub-environments to each area, the deja vu feeling happened way too much. The collectibles added a slightly different dimension from the main story, but that's not enough in my opinion. The glitchy and buggy graphics, stuttering and environment bugs just got really frustrating. I got frustrated that you can't run in the game as well. The movement speeds are either fast walk or while holding shift on the keyboard it's a very slow walk. But I don't see the point in the very slow walk because you can't fall off anything, so it renders it completely pointless to use, and when using you move around at a snail's pace. It would have been far better to have shift as a faster walk or even a run speed to speed the game up at points and give it a bit more action. So in terms of missed opportunities, to think there's any in this, Dale?
Well, the main one for me would just having the option to turn off the auto jump and actually have full control over the character would be nice.
So for me, the game was quite full of exploration puzzles where you needed to find your way to switches, etc. Although the guide colours ruined this in my opinion. But I feel there could have been more interaction in the game, such as real puzzles that you could work on, such as items you could move around to figure out the order to unlock certain areas. This would have saved far too much repetition that the game had when it comes to each area and the things you have to do. It needed more freedom to the controls, especially when climbing. This would have added much more of an action feel to the game rather than a stuck to the object feel where you simply can't go wrong or fall off. You just mindlessly press the buttons knowing nothing can go wrong, and this gets boring and repetitive. So what do you think in terms of scores on this one, Dale?
Well, I did enjoy parts of this one, and it had a nice relaxing vibe to the game with good visuals and atmosphere. The story was okay, but nothing special, and certainly has limited replayability. It is really let down by its lack of polish though, with the stuttering and collision issues, and so it's a 6.5 out of 10 from me.
So for me, I'm fairly divided on this game. I liked some of it, and in many ways it was quite unique in its story and gameplay, and the atmosphere and sound was really good in most areas. But the handholdy feeling to many parts of the controls and mechanics, along with the repetition to the gameplay, limited interaction and glitchy, buggy graphics really did dampen what was otherwise quite a solid game. So I think on balance, I'm giving Submerged Hidden Depths a 6.5 out of 10. And I do feel that this had the potential to be much better if a bit more time was put into the development.
Well guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment. Hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, and we'll see you in the next one.